I don't think I would be lying by saying that anyone who has played Dark Souls know what it means when I'm talking about Dark Souls saving you. Personally, when I first played through Dark Souls, I was in a burnt out, depressive rut in my life, and Dark Souls' harsh and fair gameplay taught me that if I persevere, I can get through anything, even if it feels like I'm slamming my head against the wall half the time. Dark Souls, and to a further extent, all of the From Software Souls-likes truly are an experience that no other games can give you, and Dark Souls 1 is perfect. Okay, well, except for this bit. And maybe this bit too, with all the dragon asses running around. Okay, and maybe this bit kinda sucks as well. Okay, look, I know this game certainly has its very high highs and its incredibly low lows, and to understand why this is, we have to take a look back at not just Dark Souls 1's development, but Demon's Souls' development, and even a little bit before that with the launch of the Xbox 360 in 2005. So, when the Xbox 360 released, it was obviously huge, mainly because they beat the PlayStation 3 out by a year and was also half the price. Because Microsoft had beat Sony in the console wars arms race, this hit Sony's pockets big time. It didn't help that Microsoft was really pushing this whole new Xbox Live thing in their marketing as well.
Yum 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 yum, I eat dick all day. Yum 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 yum, I eat dick.
Oh, the glory days of Game Chat. It also didn't help that when the PS3 finally released about a year later, it had next to no games on it. Now, tell me, dear viewer, if you were to hear this as a young lad in the early 2000s, which console would you beg your parents to get you? Because I know which one I would. Anyway, there was one other major factor we have to take into account in today's story: the Elder Scrolls. At the time, the Elder Scrolls Oblivion was absolutely blowing up, and Sony saw this and wanted a piece of the pie. So they went searching and saw this little known developer called From Software, who at the time were already working on a medieval fantasy series of their own called Kingsfield. So Sony make a deal with From Software to make an Oblivion clone, but better, so they can recuperate their losses from the PS3's disastrous launch. But there's one issue: the new Kingsfield game they were making kinda fucking sucks. It's so bad, in fact, they can't even get any prototypes to work. So both Sony and From Software decide to give up and agree that this was a fruitless venture. This is where my boy Miyazaki comes in to save the day. You see, before all this, Miyazaki was actually the lead developer of the Armored Core games, and when he caught word of the failings of the new Kingsfield game, he asked if he could take lead, and despite him never really working on a game like this before, they gave it to him anyway. Miyazaki saw this as a perfect opportunity to make a game in his favourite genre, and it was also the perfect climate for him to get experimental and turn the game into whatever he wanted. And if his ideas didn't work out in the end, it didn't really matter, because the game was already considered a failure, and if his ideas did work, he would be praised for bringing the game back from development hell. Yeah, it didn't work. Okay, let me explain. So Miyazaki decided to make this game in the opposite direction of the Oblivion clone that the Sony executives wanted, and he wanted to make a smaller game that incentivized exploration and made you clench your toes at every turn. They also wanted to do away with the traditional RPG quest giving as the progression, and make the combat based more around the player's skill rather than using artificial difficulty. The way he did this was by making the game hard as fuck and you losing half your health when you die. Miyazaki was so scared that the Sony execs would can the game for it being too hard that he actually hid the fact you lost half your health from them. And he was right to fear this, as one of the execs actually went on record after playing it and said, "This is an unbelievably bad game," and refused to release it outside of Japan. So when it releases in Japan, it performs horribly. But then something strange happens. Eventually, people start importing the game to the West, and sales rise from below 20k to about 100,000. Just still no Oblivion killer, but From Software happy to see that it was gaining a fan base, no matter how small, and those fans start asking for an official English version. So they hire Atlus to officially import Demon's Souls to the West, and sales ramp up again, this time dramatically to over 1 million copies sold. Now the thing is, before this had even happened, Miyazaki had made an absolute giga-chad decision, and was already developing Dark Souls. And this time, he knew exactly what he needed to do to make his vision succeed. He was essentially micromanaging Dark Souls all on his own. He personally talked to individual developers, named every boss and NPC, and even overlooked the menu's UI. But he also wasn't some overarching dictator. He encouraged artists, developers, and writers to present their own ideas to him and to be added into the game. Eventually, Dark Souls releases, and despite where you think all this build-up has been leading to, it's an unoptimized, unfun mess. Now, you guys may have heard that Blighttown infamously ran at below 30 FPS on a good day, but not even I knew that this was a consistent thing for most of the game. I also didn't know that the aggro range was more akin to Dark Souls 2, video on that coming soon by the way, but also that you could stack getting cursed, meaning you could infinitely halve your HP each time you died. Yeah, I'll admit, not a very good choice there, Miyazaki. And on top of all that, these graphics weren't good even for the time, making the whole low FPS thing even more angering to players. But fortunately, Dark Souls did sell well enough with the right audiences, and FromSoft released Prepare to Die Edition a year later, which fixed all of these issues. Then in 2018 we got Dark Souls Remastered, which is one of those older remasters where all they do is make metal and water shinier and then call it a day, but that's the version we're reviewing in today's video. I think that the way they remastered this game is a massive missed opportunity. The original version was obviously very rushed, which led to a very underwhelming second half of the game, and definitely should have been completely redone in my opinion. Dark Souls 1 is an incredible game. Whilst its initial release was not very good, it is now considered the father of Souls-likes. For me, it was my first Souls game, and it personally changed the way I view every game, especially when it comes to storytelling. The story of Dark Souls is presented to us much like Demon Souls, where we aren't given much, and a lot of the story is hidden within context clues, environmental storytelling, and item descriptions. Basically, the gist of it is, you are the chosen undead. In my case, that's this guy, Slim Vaginator. And you are chosen to go on a pilgrimage to rekindle the first flame and reignite the Age of Fire. Now, I understand in my synopsis there, I did use a lot of jargon that may not make a lot of sense to people who haven't played the games before, but there is a whole opening cinematic which explains it slightly less vaguely. And I know that if I get started on this game's story, I wouldn't be able to help myself, and this video would end up becoming a 4-hour long lore video. I genuinely think the lore in this game, and any Souls game for that fact, is incredible, and I always watch a massive lore video upon beating them. So now let's talk about the bread and butter of this series, the gameplay. I absolutely love the gameplay in Dark Souls. It feels like you're always having a Mexican standoff with the enemies you're fighting, and that's mainly thanks to the lock-on system. And for the most part, the gameplay is solid, and I have no real complaints, except that when you're locked on you can only dodge in 4 directions, which usually means I play the game not locked on so I'm able to dodge attacks. Now, I can't do a Dark Souls 1 review without talking about its level design, both the good and the bad. The first half of the game is incredible. The interconnected world leads to a lot of amazing moments where you accidentally find your way back to Firelink Shrine. The first and most memorable one of these is going down the elevator in Undead Parish. On my first playthrough, ending up at Firelink Shrine after slogging through the Undead Burg was an amazing feeling. Midway through the game, you'll end up in a place called Anor Londo, and whilst a very visually stunning area, this is where the level design starts to go downhill in my opinion. People who reviewed this game seem to forget how empty this area can be, and you spend a lot more time running than you do fighting. But all in all, it's still a very solid area. After this though is where the level design takes a noticeable swan dive into the ground with the Duke's Archives, Tomb of the Giants, and Lost Izalith. The Duke's Archives isn't necessarily a bad area design-wise, it's more just very confusing to navigate because of these stairs that you can make change directions. The Tomb of the Giants has the same issue, except the reason it's so hard to navigate is because it's darker than the deepest crevices of a badger's arsehole in there. I genuinely don't think I'd ever actually explore this area, I always just run through it. Obviously they have given you a light source, that being a lantern, but they made it that for it to even light up you have to hold the left bumper down, meaning that if you were to actually explore this area, your finger would be getting very tired. Lost Izalith is by far the worst offender when it comes to the bad areas in Dark Souls' second half. I mean, just look at it. Can you really look at this lava pit full of dragon ass and say this looks finished? This area even has the worst boss in all of the Souls games, being the Bed of Chaos, who I haven't fought properly since my first playthrough because I usually do the firebomb cheese, which I fucked up on this playthrough and had to fight her third phase properly. But after all that, they do bring it back a bit with the killing of the first flame and the final boss. Overall, Dark Souls is a very good game, and without the success it saw, we would never have gotten greater games like Elden Ring. Even with its very disappointing second half, I still do highly recommend people play this game, but definitely not as an introduction to the Souls-likes. I give it an 8 out of 10. Please like and subscribe to the channel for all that good stuff, and remember friends, don't you dare go hollow.